Unfortunately, my parents passed away in a massive accident. It was a car accident and, well, it broke me. I am a younger brother. I have an older brother and my parents absolutely adore him. Well, they left him everything in the will. The house, the money, the cars, everything. I'm not even 20 years old. I don't know how I'm going to survive because I got nothing. And now my lazy piece of crap brother is deciding, hey, since I'm the one that owns this house, you need to get out because I need my own space. Well, you know what? Okay, I will get out, but I'm coming back for revenge. We're a happy family of 4 people. Me, my older brother John, my mom Emily, and my dad Mark. Albeit we're a small family, we're not really close together as other families. Growing up, me and John were often let alone in the care of a babysitter. That suited us just fine, and we got into all sorts of mischief. Mom and Dad would be out on long business trips that lasted for days, sometimes even weeks. I grew up in the care of babysitters and tutors. As we grew older, John and I grew apart. He had become a different person and was no longer the fun older brother I was used to. He was lazy and would just slog around all day. He tried his hand at university, but things like calculus or biology never set in with him. Well, I, on the other hand, had a liking for learning something new every day. There was only so much you could do as a kid when you were left alone in the company of a 50-something old lady and a brother who slept or video gamed all day. It was all fine until one despicable day. That day has been burnt into my memory forever. I was reading up on some material, and John was watching something on TV, as usual, when the phone rang. I went to pick it up, and when the person on the other end spoke, my blood ran cold. John looked up and asked me what's wrong, when he heard the noise of the phone slipping from my hand onto the floor. There had been an accident on Route N96. A route my parents favored on their way back from their trips. Their car had been totaled and it flipped over, causing my parents to die, right there on the spot. I was devastated and so was John. We were not close to our parents, but they were still our parents and we loved them. We had fun when they were around, but now that was all gone. I broke down as John tried his best to console me, and a funeral was held for Emily and Mark, our now deceased parents. John was nowhere to be found at the funeral. When I got back home after a long, painful service, I found him asleep on the couch, crumbs and chips lying all around him, with cans of soda scattered everywhere. I only felt more saddened at the sight in front of me because I guess he had this way of dealing with pain. A few days passed by and we're contacted by a lawyer regarding the will our parents had stipulated. The property contained in the will was our house, which was to be inherited by John. The will had a traditional stipulation that favored the eldest son, and I had figured as much. Even though Mark and Emily had 2 sons, they had always favored my older brother over me, despite him being the way he was, lazy, and not being accomplished in much. I was not bothered by his arrangement initially. Not at all. I had a place to stay, food on my plate, and I had my older brother. It suited me just fine, even though I had nothing to my name. As the days turned into weeks, I noticed John's lack of concern and effort. He would spend his days just lazying around, neglecting the upkeep of the home and avoiding any responsibility. The burden of managing the property fell solely on my shoulders, and I grew tired of shouldering the load alone. I needed to talk with him and tell him to help me around the house more. And seeing as he's the older brother, I would urge him to be more responsible and take up more duties while I focused on my studies. Well, one fine day when John was lazing around on the couch per usual, I walked in after finishing my classes, and the room was a mess. The beds were not made and the kitchen was littered with food. The maid had not shown up and John had not bothered enough to call and check up on her. I was already in a mood after a long day of classes, and with the house a mess, that would just add to having to do more work that John had not bothered to do. I walk up to him, and I unleash my anger. calling him lazy and telling him how he had at least had to help me out with household chores, and seeing as how it was his house, he had to do more. John and I had an argument where he told me how he's busy too and not just lazing around doing nothing. I went to bed as I was tired and did not have the energy to argue with him, much less tidy up a whole house. I wake up to John standing over my bed. I asked him what the matter was, and he told me he needed to talk about me. He appeared mad from last night's altercation. I figured this was something to do with that, and I had said to him how I called him lazy. John, with a serious note, said I need to be more independent. I asked him what else does he want me to do. I make my own food, do my own laundry, and help out around the house. He told me I need to get out, as he needed the space to himself, and since the house was in his name, he owns it, and it's his place now. He told me I needed to find a place of my own, and now that I was old enough to do it, I could get a job and move out. I was appalled. My own brother was kicking me out of our house. Well, it was his house now, according to him. It was at this moment that I felt terrible, that my parents have left nothing to my name, and I would have to fend for myself while my brother didn't even have to get off the couch and work. Well, not even hard at all to fend for himself. I could not fight back legally. The house was in his name, and any actions he takes about who lived in it would be backed by the law, despite them being morally wrong, and so John evicted me from the house I've lived in since I was born. There wasn't much I could do at the mere age of 19. I would not be able to get employed at a stable job as I was pursuing my degree. It was about to be a challenging period. I had gone from sleeping on my bed without a care in the world to finding a place to live and a job to fund it. When I had run out of my savings after spending them on staying at hotels, I contacted an old friend, Sam. Sam and I were more like brothers than John and I ever would be. We shared things, feelings, secrets. Sam would often keep me company when I felt alone or missed my parents, and at their funerals, Sam was my pillar of support. I contacted Sam and asked if I could come over to talk. I need a place to stay, and he was my last and only resort. Sam was more than eager to invite me in. He listened intently to what I said to him and told him about how the will had named John as the sole person to get the inheritance and how I had nothing left to my name. I also told him about how I had nothing to my name and would have to find a job to sustain myself as John had evicted me off his property. Well, Sam sympathized with me and offered me a place to stay. His parents, too, did not mind having me, provided I help around the house and take care of myself. I found a part-time job at the nearby store managing the register. The manager who hired me informed me that the job was not permanent as the position was filled, but due to them being short-staffed, they had to hire somebody temporarily. I helped Sam's dad out in the garage, and on weekends, Sam would help me out, and together we had a good time working for his dad. My other friends helped me out by offering me some tasks that I could do for a small sum of money. I did not want to bother my friend, Sam's family, by living with them for too long and wanted to save enough to pay rent and have my own apartment. And thus, with my friend's generosity and the part-time jobs I took on, I was able to survive on my own. It had been a year into this hardship and I finally turned 20. Although, I still felt like I was stuck in the same place and at the same age I was when I started working after being evicted. I wonder what happened with John, as the inheritance Mark and Emily left him was not going to last him forever. He had bound to have realized that I hoped he had started looking for a menial job to sustain himself in case the inheritance ran out. After what he had done, I had been angry with him, but he was still my brother and, well, I wished him well. In the early hours of a Monday morning, I had just logged into my work and I checked my mail as I usually do, along with a good cup of coffee to get me started, and as I was skimming through, a certain email caught my eye. It was from someone named George. a name that seemed quite familiar. In his mail, he said that he wanted to have a meeting with me, as he had to disclose some important information that had just come to his notice. I replied back with a date and time feasible for me to have the meeting, and I looked up George online and I found out he was a practicing lawyer. The mention of lawyer told me whatever it was had to inform me was not going to be good. George's face too seemed familiar, but I could not come up with where I had seen him after racking my brain. Perhaps he was quite popular, and I'd seen him on a billboard. Update number 1. Since all of you have been asking for an update regarding the meeting with me and George, here it is. George and I decided he would meet in my apartment. After a year of hard work and sleeping only 5 hours a day, I managed to secure one. He showed up with a beaming smile with a briefcase in hand, and an overall pleasant expression on his face. He seemed too happy to be conveying what I thought was bad news I was about to receive. He sat down and seemed lost in thought. I waited for him to say something until I finally broke the silence by asking him what the heck was wrong. He laughed and asked whether or not I recognized him. Upon seeing the confusion on my face, he answered his own question, telling me that he was my mom's lawyer, and he had seen me once when I was still in diapers and marveled at how much I now have grown. George now turned serious and told me about something that my mother had done. Sure, Emily and Mark favored John, with him being the older son, but maybe Emily saw into his greed and laziness a long time ago. She could have an inkling that once old enough, John would kick me out of my own home and I would be left alone to fend for myself. George told me about a secret trust fund that was set up with a few $100,000. And when George told me that the trust fund named me as, well, the owner, I could jump with joy, and I even kissed the man who delivered this good news to me. I would no longer have to hustle to earn my way through the world. I would no longer have to work a million part-time jobs or even depend on anybody to survive. Hell, I could even go to college and finish my degree. The money was substantial, sufficient for me to buy a home and support myself indefinitely. I would never have to work again. The small feeling of resentment I had towards my brother, however, now grew into full-blown feelings of anger and resentment towards him. Now that I had the monetary means to do it, I want to make him suffer, just like I had to suffer. This newfound wealth combined with feelings of resentment for John's actions prompted me to plot my revenge against him. I learned from friends and family that John was selling our ancestral home that he had inherited due to his financial misfortune. This had given me an idea. I purchased the house right from John under an anonymous name and evicted him and moved back into the place I once lived and cherished as a kid. Update number 2. Overjoyed, I threw a party for all my friends and family at my house. Everyone had shown up with flowers and gifts for a supposed housewarming ceremony. John had been lingering nearby and wanted to meet the new owner of his house, but was not able to do so. He saw the party as an opportunity and walked in with one of the guests, who surprisingly turned out to be our relative. Now, John was even more curious to uncover the owner's hidden identity. And when he saw me in the spotlight making a toast to my mother and my house, he lunged at me. Everyone was now focused on the two of us to see what the heck the drama was about. John appeared in a tattered state, with his clothes tattered and a beard he had grown due to not having shaven for days. However, seeing this state of him did not make me feel a glimpse of pity for him, seeing as how he was ready to fight with me over my actions, the same actions he had taken a year ago. After selling the house to me, John was homeless and had spent all his money on who knows what, and was now living on the street. He blamed me for his misfortune and called me cold-hearted and vindictive for buying the house and evicting him. As others looked on, I told John that I was only doing what he's done to me a year ago, when he had inherited the house in his name. John eventually left when security showed up to clear the commotion, but now there was a chatter among the crowd as everyone talked of the drama that just ensued. I overheard conversations and our friends seemed divided over the matter. Some applauded my courage for finally standing up to John and getting what I deserved and recognized John for his wrong actions. Others took pity on him and said it was my responsibility to help my brother out now that he could not do it, and said I had crossed the line in going ahead and purchasing the house and evicting him. They said, as his brother, I should have allowed him to stay. Was I not the one who took care of the whole house and managed my studies too, side by side, when John had done nothing but been lazy? I received several written threats from John saying how he would sue me for the house, and he would hound me whenever I went out, hurling the same baseless threats at me. I knew John did not have a penny and did not have the funds to afford a lawyer, so I literally laughed in his face as he threatened me. His threats seemed empty, but his anger and desperation to get back what he had believed was rightfully his seemed very real. And so guys, I need your help discerning whether I'm the a-hole for buying my childhood home from under my brother's nose, who inherited it after our parents' death, kicked me out, and is now threatening to sue me despite knowing he can't even afford a hamburger. I know John's in the wrong for what he did, but I fear that my actions of taking revenge on him after resenting him were just turning me into the person that John was. Update number 3. George contacted me again. He had further information about the secret trust fund that he felt I should know. The dispute between John and I was still ongoing. I was still being sent threats from him, and there was talk among my friends and family, and most of them now seemed to pity John and said I should have just taken him in and shared the home. They seemed to have forgotten how just a year ago he kicked me out and I was suffering just the same, but nobody stood up for me, except for a few friends, and asked him to take me back in. George met me at my home. He walked in and stood there for a while, reminiscing about the good old days when Mark and Emily were still alive. George had good memories with Emily, as not only was he her lawyer, but he was also her friend. I was not the only one devastated after my parents' accident. Now, I recalled that I'd seen George at the funeral, where he was standing quietly in a corner and shed a tear for the lost lives. George sat down and sunk into the warm sofa that was now placed instead of the hard wooden chairs that my brother set up. George told me about a meeting he had with my mother once. Me and John were out playing, and Mark was out on a solo business trip or something, and he knew about what the trust fund Emily set up was, but he did not know what she was about to do with it. Emily called George and saying it was urgent, and George had shown up in a jiffy, as he thought it was something of an emergency for Emily to call him in such a manner. As George sat down, Emily told him this was regarding the trust fund she and Mark had set up. I would come to know that the trust fund was initially set up for John, and it was in his name. Well, I was shocked to learn this information, as I had thought the trust fund was set up for me. Mark and Emily would then put in their savings slowly to accumulate a certain amount of money that would last my brother, and he would never have to work. I felt saddened after knowing this information, as throughout their whole life, my parents had only thought about my brother's financial well-being. Maybe they saw my potential and just decided I could have a well-paying job in the future, but they did not care enough to think about my financial well-being and were fine with the thought of me working hard and enabling John's laziness. Emily told George about an incident between me and John that had made her rethink, the trust fund that was in John's name. Emily was quick to catch on to signs of his greediness and laziness early in life. During one of his birthdays, John had called over some of his friends, and Emily and Mark had gotten them pizzas and juice to party with. I was too small to remember this incident, but John was old enough. He and his friends hopped onto a game as I came in and pestered John to let me join them to play. John grew tired of my crying and pushed me out the door, locking it behind me. He would later come out and take all the pizza and juice inside with him, leaving nothing for me to eat. John and I were told about the will, and how John would inherit it in his name for quite a young age. Emily and Mark did not have a problem with him inheriting it, and saw it fit since he was the older kid and wanted to put a sense of responsibility in him. Well, they had always assumed he would take care of me in case the unthinkable happened to them. However, that certain day, Emily had witnessed the altercation between me and John and went to talk to him, just to allow me to play with him and his friends. Well, John gets all mad and said it was his house, and he would do as he pleases in it. He told Emily she and I were embarrassing him in front of his friends and asked us both to leave him be. Later that day, when he had to clean up his room, he made me help him. Emily took pity on me, seeing how my older brother was treating me to do this bidding. So, in her last days, when Mark was away, she had called George over to change the name of the owner of the will, saying that I would inherit the money. She made George change it from John's to mine and not talk about this change to Mark. George was more than happy to oblige as he sympathized with me, and she did not want John to have both the house and the funds, fearing that he would just waste them away. I thanked George for conveying this information and bid him farewell, asking him to keep in touch with me in case John actually found a way to go ahead with suing me. I sat down on the sofa that was previously occupied by George with my head in my hands, and thought of my past and present churning in my mind. This revelation stirred mixed feelings in me. On one hand, I was feeling vindicated for my actions, believing it's what our mother would have wanted, seeing how John had previously treated me. On the other hand, I could not help but question whether my retaliation was justifiable or if I had become the very thing our mother was trying to prevent in John. I was conflicted with this, and also felt saddened at the thought that if, well, it had been John who had been the person he is, I would still be out slogging myself for money, while John enjoyed all the lavishness that he had got. I wondered if in the end whether Mark and Emily really did care or not for the only son who would show any love towards them, while John had not bothered. I'm keeping the money. Good riddance, John. I don't know why everyone in OP's family started turning on OP at the end of the story, saying, hey, he's your brother. Did they just forget OP's brother just did the same thing last year, but literally left him with nothing? And if it was not for the mother, who passed away, rest in peace, well, OP would have had nothing. So no, I don't feel bad for the brother because he seemed like a real toxic jerk. But I want to hear what you guys think about it. I know this story, it goes deep and there's a lot to it. So let's go ahead and discuss this in the comment section down below. Drop your thoughts and, well, I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you're new to the channel, my name's Mr. Reddito. I read stories every single day and there's no telling what we're going to talk about. Mother-in-law dramas, inheritance dramas, Karens in the Wild stories, Am I the A-holes? The list goes on and on. I hope to see you guys tomorrow. Remember, it's cool to be kind. See ya.